Hello everyone and welcome to episode 18 of the Card Combo Show. I've had a haircut, yay! I don't look like a hobo anymore, so let's go. Well, I don't think I look like a hobo anymore. Anyway, let's go. So the cards I'm looking at this week are Steiner, Edea or Edea, Ardyn, the new Opus XII Krile, and Zeid or Zeid. There's quite a few ways you can pronounce a lot of these characters' names. I'm just going to pronounce them the way I pronounce them. Let's go! Okay, so Steiner. I'm going to focus mostly on his dull one active water forward ability, just due to the fact that the rest is fairly standard. So Cecil, one of Cecil's biggest drawbacks is the fact that he has to block, so if you don't want to attack with Cecil, but you don't have to block either, be able to dull him with Steiner in the field, kind of get Cecil out of the way, buffs Steiner, and also Steiner will be hard to kill because of Cecil. Steiner, Cecil, Cecil, Steiner, you know what I mean. Folker, so maybe you can dull Folker to buff Steiner, then discard one water summon, reactivate Folker and a water backup, and dull her again to give Steiner a buff. Tidus, so you can play Tidus onto the field on your opponent's attack phase. They just go swinging thinking Steiner's going to have to block, but he's not going to survive. Tidus is not a very heavily played card, so it would probably take your opponent by surprise, but be able to choose either activate all the water forwards, so maybe you've got a fair few water forwards there. You can activate them all and then maybe dull them or block and then dull them all to give Steiner a nice big buff, or you could just choose one water forward against plus 2000 power to the end of the turn on Steiner, and then you can also dull Tidus to buff Steiner as well. Ash, so you can pay the 2 water to activate Ash, then buff Steiner, then you can pay 2 water to dull or activate Ash, dull Ash, buff Steiner. You kind of see where I'm going with this. Obviously it's not the most cost effective way to do it, but if you want to keep Steiner alive, and Ash is a pretty hard to remove card anyway, maybe that's the best way to go about it sometimes. Fairy, so be able to activate any water forward to dull for Steiner, and then you can also draw a card, not the worst thing in the world. Yasmat, so maybe you've got Layla, a couple of Vikings, Steiner and Yasmat. I would argue at that point, if that is your field, then you're probably doing alright anyway, but still, you could dull those Vikings and Layla to buff Steiner, then you go to your activation phase and Yasmat can reactivate everything, and boom! You've got a big old Steiner and all your forwards ready to attack. Unei, so if you're on 3 or more damage, being able to flicker Steiner with Unei to be able to just get an additional card. Maybe you're not even casting offensive summons. You know, a lot of water summons aren't necessarily offensive. Something like Fairy or Moogle. Just get yourself some cards and, you know, increase the card count because of Steiner. And Mira and Ton Betty. This is a funny little one because Mira can choose an FFCC backup and activate it, make it a forward. Now there's 3 or 4 FFCC water backups, 2 of them which are Ton Betty. I think there's Ton Betty, Clavat, and Quattro Queen, I think, maybe? Anyway, what I'm saying is that you can... No, that's a WOF character. So being able to activate Ton Betty to then dull her because she's now a forward to buff Steiner would be kind of funny, and you could have used Ton Betty to pay for something earlier, but then be able to reactivate her with Mira to then dull Steiner. Now, you could make the argument that why wouldn't you just dull Mira to give Steiner the buff, but maybe you've got other ways of reactivating Mira to then reuse her. Right, Edea. So dull, put Edea into the break zone, choose one job witch in your break zone, play it onto the field. You can only use this ability during your turn. So, Edea. There's a lot of high cost forwards played these days, and generally they've served their purpose once they've entered. So things like Edea or Fusoya that came out in the same set, they have enter the field abilities, so once they're there, the chances are your opponent won't be able to attack through them because they're not exactly huge, so they'll just want to block. If you get Edea down, that means they're just kind of dead in the water at that point. They do recur their value to some extent when they enter the field, but if they can't block, that means that they're a bit worse for your opponent to have. And to be honest, Edea isn't run that much anymore, so she can surprise your opponents, especially given the fact that you could be going to attack. Your opponent maybe surprises you by playing something big onto the field with something like Tama. You could then respond with cracking Edea, bringing other Edea onto the field, and it can't block. There's a lot of different ways to be able to work Edea in to surprise your opponent, but ultimately I don't think it's the worst card in the world. Being able to stop a large selection of meta cards from being able to block is very, very useful. Ultimecia. So if you're on 6 points of damage or more, she can choose up to 2 of her abilities, but even getting one off, especially just cracking it back up and getting a forward onto the field, is just super useful. But the fact that she can freeze all your backups, or sorry, all your opponent's backups, or freeze all their forwards, or just dull 2 characters, that's super good. But be able to get 2 of those as well, pretty decent. But if you combo that with Rinoa, then maybe you played Rinoa onto the field, you choose to dull a forward of your opponent, then you crack your Edea to bring in Ultimecia onto the field, you choose to dull another of their forwards with Rinoa's ability, and then Ultimecia, you're going to dull their forwards, and you're going to freeze all their forwards, and you're going to freeze all their backups. That's pretty offensive for having paid 2 for Rinoa and cracking your Edea to play Ultimecia. Maya, one of the biggest misplays I see is that people, or not misplays, but people seem to forget jobs. Like, it took a little while for me to realise that Maya was a job witch, and obviously she synergises well with cards like Sifa and Edea. Being able to play her onto the field, and she's a very strong lightning card, is very useful. Your opponent looks at your field and is like, that's fine, I can deal with whatever they've got, and then you move to attack step, you crack Edea to bring in Maya. All of a sudden, you can now choose something to just dull out of the way, or you can give something plus 1,000 power on first strike. Your opponent then has to think, I didn't consider that. And ultimately, Edea is a form of recurrence, so maybe Maya was in the field, she had to die for whatever reason, you crack Edea, bring her back. And Jake. So Jake can obviously give something haste as well, so it can attack that turn, but it also enters the field with plus 4,000 power. So maybe do something like that with Maya or Ultimecia, and your opponent's got a lot to consider, especially with Ultimecia and Rinoa on the field. You've dull and frozen so much stuff, and then Jake's buffed it and given Rinoa haste, and given Ultimecia haste. That's very strong. Okay, so Ardyn. Ardyn is a strange card. He's kind of like a weird tax card, but he gives your opponent the choice. So yeah, they can choose to put any character into the break zone. If they do, then Ardyn cannot block. If your opponent puts a character into the break zone, you can just remove it from the game. Some cards will gain things from being put into the break zone, so being able to stop it from being able to be put into the break zone means that they lose some of the value, and also that card is no longer recoverable through Phoenixes or Kusith, whatever. There are cards that have the put into the break zone as part of their cost. Obviously their ability will still resolve, but cards that just have text where they happen to go to the break zone, then X thing will happen, Unei stops that from happening. Hackathon. Ardyn can't be broken, means he can take any amount of damage and he won't break. So Hackathon, just paying 2 to deal at the very least 9k to one of your opponent's forwards. Bear in mind with Ardyn, if his power is reduced to 0, then he is put into the break zone, and being put into the break zone is different to being broken. It is also considered a game rule, or rather, yeah, so it's a game rule, which means that ultimately, even though he might become 0 power through an ability or through a summon, it is the game checking to see that his power is 0, and then he's put into the break zone because of that. So it's not the summon that's killed him, but ultimately it is the game's rulings that have killed him. Edward. So you've got 2 cards here that activate, or not activate per se, but affect your opponent's attack phase. So you have a lot to consider. Do they want to put something into the break zone so that Ardyn can block, but then if they are going to attack, if you have a means of killing it, they're going to have to discard. So it's ultimately, do they want to attack? Flandit. So they have the choice of I have to put something into break zone because Ardyn's in the way, but then I have to pay the one for Flandit as well, making it all the more harder for them to attack, especially if you've got a couple of Flandits down. Babus. Again, you can see where I'm going with this, but they have to put something into the break zone and then they can attack with their forwards, but then they have to pay 1, otherwise it becomes frozen as well. If you combine this with Flandit as well, it's a case of, well, I have to put something in the break zone, otherwise Ardyn's going to block it, and then I have to pay 1 for the Flandit, which is at the very least probably 2 CP, with the, well, you got the 2 CP of the card they put in the break zone, and then the 1 for the flounder, and then I've got to pay 1, otherwise Babas will freeze that forward. That's a lot to have to consider, just to be able to try and get an attack through, and then you might have a sleeve up the sleeve, you might have a card up your sleeve anyway. Illusionist, so barely played card this one, but it has its uses. You can force your opponent's forwards to have to attack. Ardyn's there, he just blocks, forward is dead. Cool. Similar sort of thing with Sync as well. So choose one forward, if possible, it must block this turn. So generally if you're attacking with something, you probably want to deal damage to your opponent, but they might have a more problematic forward on the field. So you can use Sync to make that opponent's forward block, and Ardyn swings and probably kills it. Yeah. Krile, so very interesting card, also kind of creepy looking, but we'll move past that. 2 CP, 5k forward, similar to Idolus. When Krile enters the field, choose one summon from either player's break zone. You can cast it this turn. If you cast it, remove the summon from the game after use instead of putting it into the break zone, and you can pay 1 to do the same thing as well. So by casting it, I believe this means that you, 1, will have to pay the full CP cost of the summon, but 2, you will also have to pay the correct colour for that summon. So, Wall, she's a Warrior of Light. You put Wall into the break zone, bring Krile into the field, and then maybe nab a summon out of your opponent's break zone, or just cast one of your own. Maybe you want to cast, maybe Wall gets put into the break zone, brings Krile into the field, you cast Kusith from your break zone to get your Wall back to play Wall again. You know, there's funny things you can do with that. Unei. So Unei, I'll just read her text. The cost required to cast your summons is reduced by 1 for each job summoner forward you control. It cannot become 0. So, the key thing there is the cost required to cast your summons. So if your opponent's got something like a Glacier Labalus in their break zone, you still have to pay the full 3 for it. Even if you've got Unei and a couple other summoners down, it will still cost the 3. It will reduce the cost of your own summon zone in the break zone, so that's at least some solace there. Phoenix or Tama. So being able to tech in Krile on your opponent's turn, or just your opponent casts a big summon, you're like, I want to cast that summon. Use Tama, pay 2. Bring Krile into the field, I think I'll play that summon as well. Again, you have to remember you have to pay the CP cost for the card, or for the summon she wants to cast, and the correct elements, but in Earth there's a lot of ways of doing multicolour, so yeah, still funny. Shelke and Unei. Right, this is a fun little combo, I love this sort of stuff. So you pay 3 for Shelke, who can also bring in Krile. Because Shelke brought in a forward, your opponent has to discard. Krile enters the field, sees a summon in your opponent's break zone, you go to play it. You've cast a summon with Unei on the field, so now you can flicker either Shelke to bring another forward in and make your opponent discard, or to flicker Krile to then grab another summon from either your opponent's or your break zone. Now obviously Unei does state that this effect will only trigger during your turn and only once per turn. So it's not like a case of, Krile, play a summon, Unei, flicker Krile, Unei, summon. You know, you can't keep doing that. It's only once, but at the very least you've paid 3 and you've got Shelke from hand, Krile from hand, and then you're paying for whatever 2 summons you get from Krile's entry twice. And your opponent's had to discard. That's pretty funny. And Gilgamesh. You attack with Gilgamesh, you bring Krile onto the field, you steal your opponent's summons. Sometimes it might even be more beneficial just to get rid of your opponent's summons. They may not, like casting it may not be the best thing in the world for you, but being able to stop them from being able to recur that summon, that can be very useful. And generally your opponent will be playing good summons. It's kind of weird to say that, but it's true. So being able to utilise your opponent's deck as well seems to be the theme of Opus 12 actually. Krile being able to use your opponent's summons, Lanny being able to use your opponent's cards, so yeah, either way it's funny. But Krile being able to use her ability both on the field, but by Gilgamesh bringing her in, means that regardless of how your opponent gets rid of Krile, she'll probably be stealing summons. And Yasmat. So Yasmat being able to reactivate all your characters means that you can use Krile's ability to just nab your opponent's summon, or just use one of your summons, and then reactivate everything and you're good to go anyway. And finally, Zeid, or Zeid. When Zeid is dealt damage by a character, that character's controller discards 1 card from his or her hand. 1 ice, Zeid gains 1000 power until the end of the turn. So bear in mind that it's the character's controller discards 1 card. So if you deal damage to your own Zeid, you have to discard. Generally there isn't much friendly fire and ice, but there's something to be wary of. So Hecaton, it's a bit of a weird card, but ultimately the damage source is from your opponent's forward. You choose your forward and you choose your opponent's forward, so they deal damage to each other. The way Zeid has been dealt damage is from your opponent's forward. Even though it's because you cast Hecaton Share, the source of the damage is your opponent's forward. So ultimately they have to discard. So chances are you're breaking your opponent's forward and you're forcing them to discard. That's why I play in a Hecaton. Sync, so a similar card to before. Choose one forward. If possible, it must block this turn. Chances are your opponent's forward has died because Zeid is big, but they also have to discard because it dealt damage to Zeid. Titan, maybe your opponent has to bite the bullet and they're like, well, I have to kill Zeid, unfortunately, so, and I don't have any actual break effects, so I'm just going to deal 9 to him with my, I don't know, my Ifrit that's been buffed from other Ifrits. So I'm just pulling that out of my head. And they're going to have to discard because of that. Well, you just play the Titan. No, Zeid isn't going to die anyway, so you've just invested a lot in having to discard and killing my Zeid, and he doesn't die. Minwu, similar sort of thing. It makes it all the more harder for him to die through chip damage. Obviously, he will, something like a Diablo, just arrow break him. That kind of sucks. But being able to buff himself just through paying ice and having a Minwu effect means he's all the more threatening. And Imo, maybe your opponent uses a lot of chip damage, but they're just steering clear of Zeid. Well, maybe they've cast something like an Ifrit or Brynhilde. You're like, actually, oh, sorry, no, can't be those. Maybe they've played something like big 5 CP Cloud onto the field. They're going to deal 3 plus their damage to a forward. Now I'm going to change that, and you're going to deal it to Zeid, and now you have to discard even though you invested so heavily in your Cloud. Cool, there we have it. I hope you all enjoyed the video. We are edging slowly closer to Opus 12. I believe they announced November the 6th as the release date for Opus 12, so if I'm being perfectly honest, doing these videos weekly is going to be a bit of a struggle given that our card pool is getting thinner and thinner to work on new combos. Obviously we've still got the spoilers and things to be able to work with, but that's not really enough to go with. So I'm probably going to start making these videos bi-weekly, and each video will hopefully have a couple of spoilers to play around with. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the videos, and I can't wait till Opus 12 when we can start getting these a bit more frequently, and there'll be so many more new and fresh combos flying about just to mess around with. Anyway, yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.